One of my subscribers, Kevin, called in with a very good idea, actually, and I like the idea. I think it's unifying. I think it brings people together. And I do think showing numbers, showing support, if we're looking for our inroads into the political space, it is not done in party politics. It's done in the crowd. If, if you remember, the argument that I made was that the day that Sanders lost the race, when he flamed out, when he said, all right, I'm done, that his race wasn't over, that the push and the fight for Medicare for all didn't stop because Sanders lost. At that moment, the fight needed to be waged in the public. If indeed you want my supporters to back you, well, you're going to have to back my supporters. Now, we're in the midst of a pandemic, and Medicare for all just seems like it fits. You have you have what 88% of Democrats that back the policy. You have 74% of the rest of the public that back the policy. You have 69% at worst of the rest of the public that back the policy. You're in the middle of a pandemic where the government, through malfeasance, kills 400,000 people, give or take, because of the rampant nature of the virus. And that's on top of over 20 million people infected. This is the part where we need to start and push for Medicare for all. And I got to be honest, it shouldn't have never stopped. Biden has gone so far as to say he'd veto Medicare for all. Pelosi, Schumer, none of these people are backing it, despite the fact we're supposedly in a representative government. The idea that Kevin came up with was basically to show support, to show how many people, to show the numbers of people who are for Medicare for all, and for all of the lefty YouTubers to basically ask their people to tweet. The tweet is very simple, it's very straightforward. It seems almost inconsequential, but there is something to it if you have millions of people that are basically focused on one very specific topic of Medicare for all now. If that grows, if that grabs numbers, then you immediately have the capacity of a crowd that you can at the very least engage with and interact with. Also, division is not what we are aiming for. This plan is not based on party. It's not even based entirely on ideology. Do we need healthcare in this country? Is it a viable option to have healthcare in this country? Does it make sense from an economic standpoint? The answer is yes. We save billions with that, with Medicare for all and a changeover. Not to mention many of the issues that people have right now go away. Whether it's the paying for the insulin medication, the paying for the various surgeries, the not able to get health at the end of life, all of those things are basically mediated by the policy of Medicare for all. Even with Trump in office, our outcomes would have been better with the Medicare for all systems. At the very least, Medicare for all with COVID-19. You must understand the government's job is to provide for the general welfare of the population. And in this very specific instance, they did not do that. Not just not do that, over 20 million people are affected with this virus. Nowhere else around the world is even close. And so for the political leaders to come into play and not see it as their responsibility, to not see how all of these people ill and all of these people sick are a direct result of government malfeasance, that is problematic. Medicare for all is my litmus test. And you guys, at this point, anybody that's watched this channel basically know why. I grew up with this thing called Osgood Slaughters, who's basically vicious pain in the knees, going from the time I was like 8 years old all the way up until the time I was about 16 or 17. At 17, I was diagnosed with kidney failure. From 17 to 30, there was nearly 2 major surgeries a year, with twice within that mix that they expected me to croak. I have been without Medicare and regular health insurance with a failing transplant. There's nobody that wants Medicare for all more than I do, that believes in Medicare for all more than I do. And this is kind of one of those things where the question becomes, how do we get it across the finish line? If you had a situation where 88% of the Democratic Party backed it, how do you get out of 2020 without that being a mandate? And part of the reason it wasn't a mandate is because they believe you were going to vote for them regardless. The way the left engages its political party versus the way, let's say, the right engages their political party, drastically different. And the left has a lot to learn. And fact of the matter is, people like Sanders, and in some respects even AOC, lead people astray in somewhat weak politics that doesn't necessarily use the leverage that they have at their disposal, even when it is sitting in their lap. Forced to vote, for example. Whatever my problems, an issue with it, I thought it was initially a good idea. And I still do. But at this point, forced to vote has passed. But it does show what can be accomplished when people put their minds together in order to try to push in a particular direction. The goal of this, and I'm not going to castigate anybody if they don't necessarily do it. I have no expectation that anybody listens to this channel from the other channels. I just kind of assume that I'm my own little enclave. But if people want to get Medicare for All passed, and you want to show support, what I'm asking is for you to assist in pushing a Twitter storm. Kevin's idea was to basically send a tweet once a week at a particular time, bringing in Pelosi, Schumer, and Biden over and over and over again. The hope of this is that the numbers that start to grow and the number of people who are involved in it start to grow. And people who just need to say, yeah, I'm for Medicare for all. It's a minor, trivial thing to do. And yet, not only does it show numbers, it also gives you the ability to contact and relate and engage with one another, to understand who's on the same page, and to do so in a way where there's intercommunication. At the very least, to me, it starts off with numbers, and it starts off growing an organization and growing numbers. I am not trying to draw people into a political party. I don't necessarily think that's where people need to go. I think people honestly need to stand under this notion of policy and make your demands from the position of policy. You get our vote when you represent our interests, and our interests in this very specific point, whether it's African Americans, whether it's just people in general, considering the number of people that have either died or have gotten ill. Yeah, you get our vote when you represent our interests. And in this very specific point, morally, ethically, financially, Medicare for all checks those boxes. What I'm asking is that people send a tweet. And with that tweet, they put in Biden, Schumer, Pelosi with pass Medicare for all now. And after you write pass Medicare for all now, I want you to put in why. Meaning, why do you want Medicare for all now passed? What's the reason for Medicare for all that you want passed? Why do you want it passed? I want a short reason. Over and over and over again, what I'm hoping is that Kevin is right. There's no loss in this, even if I'm right, that nobody is necessarily going to follow me on this. But if I'm wrong, and Kevin is more right on this, and people do follow, people do tweet, I am very curious to see what that looks like over the course of 6 months. If indeed this grows. And not just what it looks like over the course of 6 months, if the numbers are there for it, where action and collective thought start to take place. Organization starts to take place. Like I said, the honest reality of it, if you're trying to basically get something passed in Congress that the people in those congressional bodies and the people who are putting money into their pocket and putting credit cards through their ass cheeks, if that's what you're trying to get accomplished, something that's going to adversely affect either the ideology or the people who are putting money into the pockets of those particular political leaders, then your strength is not in Congress. Those people are bought. Those people have set perspectives. No, your strength is in the public. Not me, us was valid. Pass the tweet. I'm going to put this on my Twitter page. And very basic. Hashtag Medicare for all now. Joe Boehner, Joe Biden, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi passed Medicare for all now. Now, my reason was over 20 million infected, 400,000 dead from government action. The government is directly responsible for the misery, and the public must be compensated for their pain and failure to provide for the general welfare. But put in your reasoning for Medicare for all. It's small, it's trivial, and yet what I'm hoping is over time it does show numbers. I have no expectation that this is necessarily going to change political behavior from the standpoint of the people who are in office. I do think it gives us a basis of operation and interaction. Like, share, and subscribe. Let's see. I hope Kevin is right. I hope Kevin is right. Michael Williams. The same argument can be made for pushing reparations for the foundations of Americas have been the pandemic since the founding. Push that more. The same argument can be made for pushing for reparations for foundational Black Americans who have been in the pandemic since the founding of this. Oh, push that more. I see what you mean. No, I disagree with you. That you should push that more. We're in a pandemic. That's very clear. The pandemic has killed 400,000 people with the expectation that within a month or so, that number will be up to 6,000. We've had 4,000 people a day drop dead, a couple of days ago. So to make the argument for reparations at this moment is kind of difficult to make, as opposed to the thing that is ever present and in people's face as the COVID pandemic, not to mention the mutations that are taking place with the pandemic, whether or not those things are going to assist and basically clear this up. But more importantly, also, the idea of the medical bills after the fact, meaning 28 million people are having medical bills. The overwhelming majority of the country didn't have $600 or $500 in a bank, and that was before COVID. The country, half, was in poverty, or at the very least near the poverty line, with 42% making only $18,000 a year. I'm trying to make the point that the country was already poor in many respects, even though it's the richest country on the planet. And as that country was poor, we've just added medical bills onto these people's backs. And that's on top of difficulties they might have already had. Not to mention the potential loss from work because of the illness and everything else. I guess I'm making the point that, yes, I agree with you with reparations entirely in regards to there has to be something to mind the gap. And if you're ever trying to deal with the hostilities and the tension between the two sides within the context of this country, you have to deal with the economic disadvantage that was caused by the founding of this country. So yes, Michael Williams, 1,000% agree with you on that point. And yeah, Black Americans, descendants of slaves. By the same token, this is a medical crisis. And those same people who you're talking about are at the low ends of that economic scale and would be dramatically affected and assisted with a program like Medicare for All, either in the healthcare outcomes of maintaining for the elderly or, for that matter, the raising of kids and ensuring that those kids are whole from a medical standpoint. Medicare for All is the push. Pop reality. Now you want to force the vote. No. I've always wanted to force the vote. But unfortunately, your understanding of nuance doesn't apparently seem to be present. So I'm going to leave this here. I'm going to say like, share, and for the people who you guys watch, whatever the YouTube person is, if that person may be interested in pushing Medicare for all, I would ask them to do the exact same thing that I've done and that I'm asking you all to do. And I would ask them to ask this on their platforms. This is not one of those things where I'm going to castigate or attack people if they don't necessarily do it. I'm not going to be disingenuous and say random people are standing in the way of Medicare for all. This is an inclusive unity show of strength. That is the point. That is my objective. No more, no less. If you are for Medicare for all, let's pick a time. 11 o'clock on Monday send out the tweet. Like, share, and subscribe. Thanks all.